And just for the future folks watching, I'll say that here we are, First Church Berkeley UCC and friends at the first Last Wishes workshop, where we are having a conversation about how to fill out an advanced healthcare directive. This one is from Kaiser, so that we can provide for those who love us and for ourselves a roadmap for our end of life decisions, and take some measure of control over how we get to die. And perhaps, because there are miracles, how we get to live again. There's some messages. Sounds, audio's not consistent. For anyone who's having trouble hearing, you can just review the recording afterward, or we can stop and have some Q&A throughout. Bob, Stan has a question.
So one alternative is for them to dial in.
Yes. Let me go quickly and get the dial in. Actually, could someone else, just so I can keep things rolling, find the dial-in info?
You sent it in your email,
okay.
And
you can look back in the email if with video it's too tricky. Bob Stumpf.
Thanks, Molly. Good to see everyone, albeit virtually. We're going to be talking about death and uncertainty, and in particular, how an advanced medical directive can help to reduce uncertainty at the time of death, much to our benefit, but perhaps more importantly for the benefit of those around us. Molly's asked me to start things off with a few words from my perspective as a volunteer at the Zen Hospice Project in San Francisco. And I'm going to do that by briefly summarizing the 5 principles, or what we call precepts, that guide volunteer care. And more importantly, I found myself reflecting on these and getting great guidance as I live my ordinary life, and I hope they'll be of some benefit to you. At no extra charge, I'm then going to give you a 1-sentence quotation attributed to the Buddha about a life well lived, and then I'll close with a 4-sentence prose poem by Wendell Berry, which I'm quite taken by, and I think it provides great guidance, at least for me, in uncertain times. Okay, the Zen Hospice Project. Every Friday for the last 4 years, pretty much every Friday, except recently, I spent 5 hours at the hospital. If you don't know it, it's out by Twin Peaks and the Sutro Tower. Laguna Honda is actually a wonderful place. It has served the indigent population in San Francisco since 1866, 154 years ago. It's provided services to the people who came out for the gold rush. It's been providing services ever since. It's the subject of a book called God's Hospital, which is a wonderful treatise. So anyway, on Fridays, I begin the day by working as a lawyer near the Ferry Building in San Francisco, using my left brain and solving problems and getting enmeshed in the day-to-day activities of life. But then, something happens. Around noon, I get into my car and I drive about 9 miles to Laguna Honda, and I be in my 3 afternoon shift mates, meet with the 4 morning people who are on the morning shift, and we begin with about a 20-minute meditation. We then talk about things that are happening on the ward, and then we also talk about our lives. And we could not be a more different or diverse group, and these people have become very important. We're drawn by a kindred spirit, and some of these people are some of the most important people in my life. But we then go out onto what we call S3, South 3, which is a 60-bed wing of the hospital serving hospice patients and long-term palliative care patients. And what do? We can't provide any medical care. We can't fix anything. There are no emergencies in hospice care. All we can do is to try to provide sort of a listening presence, particularly for people at the end of their lives. We can be a witness to suffering, hopefully provide some companionship. To be a volunteer, I had to take about 70 hours worth of training through the Zen Hospice Project. And as the name would imply, mindfulness is a key principle of this whole activity, trying to be aware of the moment, being with someone in the moment, and doing what you can. There are 5 principles that guide our service as volunteers. They were developed by a man named Frank Ostaseski, who was a co-founder of the Zen Hospice Project. And again, as I indicated, I find myself reflecting on these things as I live my life. So with no further ado, the 5 principles or precepts are as follows. Number 1, and this is actually my favorite, welcome everything, push away nothing. We all find ourselves with difficult emotions during the day, and a first reaction may be aversion. Push that thought away, push that principle away. Maybe I'll be better. But you know, if you can stop a moment, reflect, understand what's going on, and then deal with it, you're going to be much better off. You're going to be a better volunteer, and you're going to have a better life. The second principle, bring your whole self to the experience. By the way, if you hear a bird in the background, that's my cockatoos, not happy. Bring your whole self to the experience. Again, I find Fridays very interesting because it's a transition for me. In the morning, as I say, I'm very much in my left brain. And it takes a while for me to kind of settle down and bring my whole compassionate experience to being with persons who spend their lives saying goodbye to life. It's a very important feature, and it happens. But bring that whole concept of whatever you're doing, bring your whole self. Number 3, find rest in the middle of things. Now, what does that mean? Again, we can become very enmeshed in our daily lives. If you can take a breath for a minute, even in times of great stress, pause, reflect, understand what's going on, you're going to have a better experience, you're going to be a better volunteer, and you're going to have a better life. Number 4, don't wait. Persons at the end of their life don't have a whole lot of time left. It's important for them to say things like, forgive me, I forgive you, I love you, and ultimately, goodbye. They can't wait. They don't have much time, but those of us who aren't in that situation might want to reflect on those principles as well. How many times have we missed opportunities to say the important word to somebody who's close to us? And finally, the 5th principle is cultivate beginner's mind, or what's sometimes called know-nothing mind. It's a principle developed by Suzuki Roshi. And, you know, as Wordsworth said, the child is the father of the man, and I wish my days to be bound each to each in childlike piety. There's something about innocence. There's something about newness, putting aside, you know, old thoughts and opening time for new life and new experiences. Those are the principles that volunteers at Zen Hospice think about all the time, and I commend them to your attention. Now, to get ready for these comments, I asked a number of people to give me some thoughts, and I selected one. A dear friend of mine gave me this quotation, which I was not familiar with. You've heard similar things by other people, but this is attributed to the Buddha, and it goes as follows. In the end, only 3 things matter: to have loved, how much you've loved, how gently you've lived, and how gracefully you've let go of things not meant for you. I just think it's a wonderful sentiment. And finally, I know I've shared this with Molly previously. I'm quite taken with these words from Wendell Berry. I think the words themselves are beautiful, but the concept is even more compelling to me. And I've committed them to memory, and they go as follows. It may be that when we no longer know what to do, we have come to our real work. And when we no longer know which way to go, we have begun our real journey. The mind that is not baffled is not employed. The impeded stream is the one that sings. Louise, I think the ball is now in your court.
Thank you, Bob. That was beautiful.
Okay. I have unmuted. Is everybody hearing me? Okay, I see nods. Good. So a few months ago, Molly says October, that's probably right. I got a nudge from Kaiser. You haven't filled out your advanced directive. And then I got another one. And so I downloaded the form and I looked at it and I thought, I don't think I want to do this by myself, because they have questions like, what matters most to me? Or life would no longer be worth living if I were not able to. And the really naughty one about life-sustaining treatments, because I realized how little I know about what it's like to be in the hospital, likely to die, maybe not going to live, or maybe live with impairments. And how do I think through these things? So that's why I called Molly. And we took an hour, half an hour, something like that. And it was strangely enjoyable to go through all this and to talk about, well, what are my wishes? What do I need to know, and what do I need to figure out? And I've been thinking, like everybody, at my age, I've been through a number of deaths, and everyone is different. But for the people who go on living after a death is not the end, because there's always picking up the pieces afterwards. And what I would like is not to put my kids through what I've been through with the deaths of family members. And I'm not talking about the grief and the loss and the reshuffling of family relationships that is inevitable. I'm talking about the uncertainty, the hassle, the guilt, the struggle to figure out, and of course the mountain of stuff that's left over afterwards, and no clear idea of what to do with it. That is a burden. I'd like to relieve my children of having to shoulder that burden. So that's why I did this. That's why we're doing all these steps to have our eventual passing, Tim's and mine, kind of mapped out, so that Liz and Greg can go in and they don't wonder what to do with this thing or that, or whether mom really was ready to have them pull the plug, that sort of thing. So yeah, I think this is a great thing, and I'm glad we're doing this morning. And that's all.
Thank you, Louise. Okay, now what we're going to do is walk through the advanced directive form content, and particularly the chaplains and healthcare providers. As I move through it fairly quickly, we don't want to get too bogged down. We're going to get into the meat of it more in our small groups. But if there's anything you want to illuminate for us, just unmute yourself and jump right in. And I am just gonna, Kaiser has some great questions on their website and short videos. So if you are a member of Kaiser, you can just log in and do life care planning, and it will take you to where I'm gonna go for additional questions. And just to say, as I said in the email, you may not have a complete advanced directive when this is over. You may need to take some days or weeks to reflect on this, pray on this, have conversations with other partners. It may be difficult to figure out who you want to be your healthcare agent, or you may need to have conversations with a spouse or children to make some of these decisions. But this is a beginning in any case. Okay, if you were able to print it, or you can see it on your on the PDF, the first page is the introduction. Just sort of walks you through what the parts are: name, medical record number. Next up is selecting your healthcare agent. This should be someone who knows you well, who you trust to honor your views and values. Again, as Bob alluded to, as Louise said, the clearer you can be about what your values are, the easier you will make things if you become incapacitated or unconscious or unable to make decisions for yourself for your healthcare agent. And you should go over this with them afterwards so that it's really clear, because even with a very clear directive, they might feel guilty taking you off life support, even if you've been very clear with them. So the clearer you can be with them, the better. One thing I want to lift up right away, it's scary to approach these questions. And I think one thing that can make it easier is to understand that, this is not a once and forever thing. Kaiser suggests you revisit your plan with 5 Ds every decade. So, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90. Some of us might make it to 100, who knows? Because your feelings about life are going to change as you age. If you get divorced, if your agent was your partner, you may wish to leave your agent as your ex, or you may want to choose a new agent. Diagnosis, if you have a new or worsening health condition, you may want to revisit it. If you have a decline in health, you're not able to be as independent as you once were, that may change your feelings. And if there's a death of a significant person in your life, that may also cause you to have a new or different value that you want reflected in your own advanced healthcare plan, or you may want to designate a new agent. Okay. So, healthcare agent. You can also name people you don't want involved in your care planning. So, and that's important to say. I mean, families are complicated places. We all have opinionated people who tend to take over in our families and who may, because of their own anxieties or distress, decide to weigh in to ask for our medical records and other things. So it's okay here to name people you do not want involved in your decision-making or to have access to your records. Okay, we're on to treatments to prolong life. And actually, I wonder if Mandy or Christina want to talk to us a little bit about this, about sort of the medical aspects about them. And I can jump ahead in the Kaiser stuff too. I did some cramming, and there is some good information here about, what it actually means to be intubated, or to be given a feeding tube, a permanent, to be put on intubation permanently, to be at a feeding tube, to have CPR done. But Mandy, Christina, do you want to say anything here?
Sure. So I would say that those are the most commonly thought about so-called life support measures that are going to be most familiar to people. I think in this time of COVID, probably more people have thought about ventilators more than ever before in their lives. And with ventilators, there are many situations where they're going to be used in a temporary capacity, and we expect people will be able to come off of them. There are different levels of breathing support somebody might need. Some might be used even in a routine surgery. Others can be more enduring. And whether or not someone has a high likelihood or low likelihood or changing likelihood of being able to breathe independently is going to vary hugely by what the reasons are that led them to be intubated in the first place. I was mentioning to Molly earlier that there are some other things that I think of as life-sustaining treatments that aren't listed sometimes on forms like this, and specifically that there are some treatments that can keep people alive, but can only be administered within an ICU. For example, managing some drains and shunts, managing some IV medications, where it can keep people going, but their life is going to be restricted entirely to the ICU. And sometimes people are in a state of mind where they can express their wishes about that, and sometimes they are not. So I think those situations can feel like gray areas to family members. And the page in that document that asks about values and what would make your life worth living or no longer worth living? I think answering those questions in a really thoughtful way can give a lot of guidance to those kind of unmapped, uncharted, not so straightforward kinds of care that can be life-sustaining as well. Christina, what are your thoughts?
Mute myself. Okay. Well, I have two thoughts, and really, honestly, both of them are not so much as a healthcare provider, because in my profession in orthopedic surgery, I really don't deal with these issues at all. But I have taken this, the life care planning class at Kaiser, and one of the things that I really struck me that I remembered from that class was there's like a two, and Mandy, you could, maybe you have more experience with this in the real world, but there's like a 2-week kind of time period when you could be on like ventilation or life support, and then eventually there has to be a surgery done to make a permanent, like breathing tube or a permanent feeding tube. And so I guess that's also just a decision point that they wanted people to speak about. Like, would they want to take the step of going beyond the 2-week mark and going on a more permanent life support? So, and then the other thing is just something in my own life. A friend who's dealing with metastatic breast cancer right now and has effusions building up on her lungs, and she had them drained, and then it was like a year later before she had to have them drained again, and then it was 6 months later, and now she's basically having to have them drained every 3 weeks. And she was given, the option of having a permanent port, and so she had to face that question. She's a swimmer, and she didn't really like the idea of not being able to swim, and so she's decided, to go in every 3 weeks and have that done. And so that's kind of another example of a decision that you'd have to make, like, what's more important to you for quality of life.
I think too, there are all those complicated questions about what would you rather do? Would you rather have the pros and cons of this treatment or the pros and cons of not using this treatment? And that's kind of the scenario you're describing. I think in terms of giving guidance to loved ones and healthcare agents and so forth on what you would want, that's where, again, being really clear about what makes for a life worth living and what doesn't, and what trade-offs are worthwhile to you, that's important. Because there your friend is able to make that decision for herself. And if she were not, it becomes a completely different scenario. I guess I'm wondering if people have specific questions about some of the life-sustaining treatments, and it's possible that they'll be too highly technical for either me or Christina to answer in a ton of detail. Maybe Robin will have some input as well.
Specifically, but I was quite, whoops, sorry.
Go ahead, I unmuted you, Robin.
Okay. I was really involved with my mother's POLST recently, last year, the POLST, Physician Orders for Life-Sustaining Treatment. And I was wondering, I just looked up what's the difference between that and an advanced care directive. And I'm wondering if one of you can explain that, because it's sort of the same. That really provided me, since I was her agent, with some guidance during her last month. So maybe one of you can explain that difference.
From what I understand, the kinds of documents we're looking at today are really about giving guidance to another person for that other person to make treatment decisions for you. And the POLST is more about you making those decisions and putting them in writing in your medical chart in a way that your doctor can carry them forward. But if anyone else has a different explanation, please share it.
I can't hear you.
Okay. My understanding was that a POLST is on a single sheet of paper.
It's true.
It's something that you can post, like put up on your refrigerator if emergency teams come in to help you if something's bad has happened.
Carmel, I just unmuted you, so say what you said. Oops, I didn't. I think you have to unmute yourself because I can't seem to.
Yeah, the pulse is mainly for the emergency crew that arrives at your house. And because if you are already near death, then that will guide them as to whether or not you want to be resuscitated or not, and on the way to the hospital. So, you know, it's more immediate, and it's more for the medical profession, as was alluded to. Yeah.
Thank you all. I don't know if this is a question so much, but I was really surprised by some of the statistics about CPR, about how rarely it's actually successful in a way that restores quality of life. Can either of you speak to that? Oh, you're muted.
I think it is shocking to hear some of those, to read some of those statistics. I think context really, really matters for those. And if someone is healthy and vital and gets effective CPR and defibrillation quickly, that's one scenario. But what is more common is to have someone who is critically ill and unstable medically, who is in the hospital, who stops breathing or their heart stops beating. And then the healthcare staff, unless they have instruction otherwise, is actually obligated to do CPR. It can go on for quite a long time sometimes, and it's exhausting to perform, and it can appear kind of violent, for lack of a better word, for the person receiving it, because you're really compressing their chest pretty vigorously for a long time. And so if it's a frail person, it can be hard to watch people go through that, especially when the staff has a pretty high awareness that it's not likely to work, or that if it works, it's likely that they're going to be in the same situation again a few hours or a few days later. I think in the COVID era too, one thing to consider is that if somebody is in the ICU and they have COVID and they do want resuscitation, there is going to be some delay before it can happen, because all of the staff have to suit up in full protective equipment before they can perform CPR on somebody with an infectious respiratory illness. And it does expose them to a pretty high degree of risk to the team. And so if it is unlikely to work and it is exposing other people to risk, I think it's probably important for people to know that as they weigh whether or not they would want to have CPR done.
Right. In this brave new world, there are risks to other people to keep us alive. That's the trolley problem, right? The famous ethical trolley problem.
Yeah.
Someone
And I was just going to add, in the normal world, like in a normal setting, like if you're going in for just routine surgery and you're, relatively healthy, you'll always be asked that question. Do you want us to, perform CPR if you need resuscitation in the operating room? And generally, I ask that question to people all the time when I'm preparing them for orthopedic surgery. And I always encourage people to say yes, because in general, if you're having orthopedic surgery, it's to improve a body part so you could be more active. And, so yeah. So that answer would be yes. And that's not your overarching thing, like you can have it for that procedure and have it. So
sorry, it's okay to nuance our answers and be really specific and say, if I'm in a car accident, but I'm otherwise healthy, yes, I want CPR. If I'm at the end of a long journey toward terminal cancer, no, I don't want CPR. I'd rather go quickly. Go ahead, Mandy.
So also, if you're in an operating room and you're being so closely monitored and you're surrounded by healthcare professionals, if you do need resuscitation, it's going to happen very rapidly and effectively with the full toolbox available. And that is different than if you are out in the community, or if you are even in the hospital, but outside of that really highly monitored OR environment.
That is very helpful info.
Yeah.
Stan? I think you have to unmute yourself because I can't unmute you.
Conversation we're talking about when my spouse, who recently passed, she passed of cancer, and along the way through the journey of cancer, we reviewed what her wishes were, and so things changed as we went. And in the beginning, which I agree with, her choice would be the same as mine. I have a pre-existing MS, so I have to consider that when I'm writing my wishes down, because I want to make sure people know I want to be resuscitated. Don't put me aside because I have a pre-existing. GJ was 19 years older than me, and we noticed in the hospital that sometimes they didn't address her concerns as readily because of her age. So we decided in the beginning that it would be, yes, I want everything done for me. And this was GJ talking. I was going to be the one speaking for her. Later on, it was me having to make the choices off of what we had discussed. And it actually made it helpful for me to have the discussion with GJ, because I knew what was important to her. What was important to her was the vitality of her brain and the ability to do those kinds of activities. And her wishes were, if I could not do those activities, try to keep my brain as alive as long as you can, but if I can't do those activities. But sometimes even with the discussion, the person might get angry. There were choices I had to make where I had to have GJ make the choice, even though she wanted me to when she was conscious. And that's because of her wish of wanting her brain to be active. I felt it was very important. So the only thing to know is sometime a person going through this process will get angry because these choices are hard for them at this time. But towards the end, GJ's most wish was to be at home. So that's what we did.
Helen, not to prevent further discussion, we can have more, but that takes us to some really good questions. And I think I should have thought of this earlier, share my screen so you can read them right off the website. I guess that. Can you see the Kaiser discussion questions? Okay, you're seeing that? For example, I would want to be kept alive as long as I am able to, and think about what your answers to those questions are. Communicate in any way, live outside of the hospital. Again, Mandy mentioned, if you know that you would not want to be kept on life support if there was no chance of you ever going home, consider that. And another question, life would no longer be worth living if I had to, for example, live with permanent severe brain damage, have someone take care of all my daily needs, permanently be kept alive on a machine, etc. And again, you can't anticipate every possible scenario, but we've all had deaths we've experienced that have shaped how we think about end of life. And we can be as nuanced and specific as we want to in our advanced healthcare directives. So I'm going to go back to everybody. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. One thing that was interesting to me as I moved through Kaiser's website was hearing from a doctor that it's helpful when saying that you don't want to be kept alive or discussing life support, to give it a timeline. Don't just say for a little while. Specify days, weeks, months. We all saw what happened with Terry Schiavo. We lived through Terry Schiavo, except for maybe Angela. I can't remember how long ago Terry Schiavo was, but I think Angela's here and she's in her 20s, so maybe it was longer ago than that. I can't remember. And that's a death certainly that shaped how a lot of us think about end of life. Page 8 of the Kaiser form. I think I can get to that too. Nope. This way. Because I think it's the most touchy-feely and can help us answer questions about life support or CPR. Share my screen again. And this is what we can talk about when we get into the breakout sessions. My thoughts and feelings about where I would prefer to die. I want my loved ones know that if I'm nearing my death, I would appreciate the following for comfort and support. And then spiritual affiliation, so they can call wonderful chaplains to your aid. Let your pastor know if you're sick. Sometimes we're the last to know, and that's, then we can't offer you the care we'd like to. And then funeral plans, but we're going to do that in part 2 in 2 weeks of the Last Wishes workshops. And then hopes and wishes about organ donation, donating your body for research. And then the last part is pretty straightforward. It's just about how to make this document legally valid. Pretty much you can have 2 witnesses sign it or have it notarized. And I believe there are ways to have things notarized virtually in these days of COVID. Again, so important to talk about your advanced care plan once you've completed it with your healthcare agent, also with 2 alternate healthcare agents in case you die in a fiery wreck with your healthcare agent. And everybody, your children, anyone who might be part of that process of you dying, and just to normalize it and say, this is a really important part of life. Mandy.
So I notice where it talks about designating agents that it has like name, address, signature or something. I can't see it now, but I would just say include as much contact information as you can. Your doctors would also want the cell phone numbers and email addresses and so forth, so that if you are in a situation where they need to contact these people, they have the most available information to do so. I forget which page it was on. But where the agents are listed. Oh, that one has more. Okay, maybe it was the secondary one.
The primary, and then all.
Maybe I imagined it. Okay, it's there.
It's okay.
We're doing this every 10 years.
Every 10 years. Yeah. Or more often if there's other sort of critical incidents that make you want to change it, other shifts. Oh, I think we didn't look at this page together.
It's on page 14, Mandy. I think the page you were looking for.
This is another really good page that you're going to look at together in breakouts. It's page 5. Atul Gawande and some awesome hospice nurses kind of made this go viral a few years ago. 5 Wishes is a really good website to help you think through this. If I were having a really good day, I would be doing the following. What matters most to me is sort of thinking about your values, spiritual, relational, cultural, and life would no longer be worth living if I were not able to. And you can see again how these questions, your answers to these questions are going to change over time. My answer at 49 is going to be really different than at 89 or 99. So I'm giving myself space to, answer those differently in different decades of life. I'm going to go back to the full screen so I can see everyone's beautiful face, or not if your screen's not on. Any other questions before we take time in smaller groups?
I have a question. So I have an advanced healthcare directive, and it's not the Kaiser one, but it has sort of language about, if life support or life sustaining treatments are needed to keep me alive, then I request that these kind of be discontinued, et cetera, et cetera. But it's sort of like the first statement is if I'm suffering from a terminal condition. So where death's like within a few months, that's the expectation. Is there, and maybe I came in a little late, but there's like in this time of COVID, if I'm in the hospital I would like to be on a ventilator. I would like those life support sustaining treatments to be given in this time, because I see this as a different thing. And so I'm wondering, do we need to do some sort of addendum to our existing ones, or is it
a specific one?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I need to go back and redo this just because of this time we're in. That's my question.
Probably.
Mandy and Amy have things to say.
Let's hear from Amy. I've talked a lot.
Yeah, thanks. Main thing is to have the conversation. The main thing is not to write it all down, because who knows, and make sure everybody has that. That's good. Main thing is to have the conversation a little bit in depth about, if this, then this is what I want. Here's what's important. Here's what's not so important, so that folks know from you if they're needing to make those decisions. The main thing is having the conversations.
Thanks. Yeah.
Mandy, anything to add to that?
I agree. And Molly, you mentioned earlier, you can be specific and nuanced and say things like, if my diagnosis is known to be terminal, then I want ABC and don't want whatever. If there is a chance of recovery, then I want da 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 da. And so I think that's part of the decision making that someone was just describing, that there are things they wouldn't want in case of a terminal illness and they would want in case of a potentially non-terminal one. And you can specify that.
Okay.
Ben's going to add something.
I just wanted to kind of follow on what Amy said, and it's so important to have the conversation and remember that, and because we're here, we're sort of like opening ourselves to this conversation, but there will probably be some sort of resistance to these conversations. I am actually on my friend's advanced healthcare directive ahead of her son. And she had to navigate how to have that conversation with her son to be, actually think about this situation. Will you be able to make these decisions for me? Of course, your sister and Ben will take consideration what you're saying. But she had to basically say to her son, I'm putting my friend above you on the list. And so just when you're having those conversations, you might want to think in advance, how will this person be able to hear this conversation? How can I incorporate them in the conversation? And just remember that just because it's uncomfortable and it might be a difficult conversation, that's not a reason not to have it. And it actually will, in my experience, hopefully lead to increased closeness and sort of like intimacy with your loved ones because you're able to push through that difficulty. I think that's an important part.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Ben. Beautifully said.
I've been thinking too about what impact that decision-making role would have on different people in my life. And there are people that I love and who know me well, who in healthcare settings I know are frazzled and overwhelmed and wouldn't be well equipped, even if I love them dearly and I'm closer to them in other ways. There are other people in my life that are suited to make those decisions and not have those decisions sort of wound them deeply. And so that's something I've thought about too, and who to designate.
Yeah.
Carmel?
I've heard in my experience that saying if there's a chance doesn't really define it closely enough. Because if it's a 5% chance, cut me off, but if it's an 85% chance, well, then that's where it gets wishy-washy for me. So, they need to know how deeply you feel about that chance.
That's where I think the timeline can be really informative too, because the longer you're on some form of support, the less likely you will become to come off it. So if it's a month, or if it's 6 weeks, or if it's 2 weeks, that gives more data for people to work from, based not just sort of guesses on percentages.
I jump in. My sister Teresa, I have a sister that passed away recently, and it was a different circumstance than when my spouse passed away. It was a unprepared situation for the most part. And I can only say from my sister Kate's discussions with my sister and I, and that it made it easier to go through the process. She was on life support, and we went through the life support situation, but coming to that final decision with her husband to leave her on or take her off. And what was helpful is my sister Kate was a nurse, and a nurse practitioner. Her husband is a doctor in these areas, and it was helpful to ask to get the explanation in regards to, you know, the facts that you need to weigh, and also weigh that with what you know about the person that you're there for. But it made it helpful because we were surrounded by a lot of people, and my sister also had 2 boys, and it gave us the opportunity to help them through the process to prepare them. So as much as it's difficult to have to go in a direction of knowing you have to make the choice, that's what we knew because we were in advance preparing, because we were preparing 2 young boys through the process, you know. But it was, the saving grace was my sister sharing her thoughts when she was able to in her lifetime. And it was a difficult choice. It's a difficult choice for anybody to make. It is always going to be difficult, but having that to lean on was so helpful because I knew my sister's wishes, and our conversations over our lifetime together made it easier to go through a process I've never experienced before, having to make a decision like this.
This conversation, as difficult as it is a gift to those who will survive you. Thank you, Helen. That's beautiful. We're going to move into breakout rooms now. You're going to have at least Ben or Amy Smith or Mandy or Christina or Louise or me with you. At least one of us, maybe 2 of us. I am going to move from room to room after the first 10 minutes or so to see how you're doing, and to see if you're ready to come back to the whole group, because more questions might come up that you want to ask in the whole group before we pray and go. Because we don't all know each other and we have 2 relatively newish people here, I'd love you to spend the first couple minutes just introducing yourselves. And because we're talking about something so serious, I think it'd be good both to have a lighthearted question and a question to help you immediately begin to gain a little bit of trust. So I'll ask you to say your name, your favorite ice cream flavor, and significant death and what it taught you. I know that could be like a half-hour story for each person. So I'm just going to ask you to give, you know, the interplay. I could tell you about version. I could tell you about the death of my mother and what it taught me about surrendering to God, or whatever it is, you know, your sort of one at most 2 sentences about that experience, just to get to know each other a little bit, start to build trust. Be patient with me as I put you into groups, since I've never done this before. It might take me a minute. You can even go do a quick bio break if you like, and raise your hand. You get a pen if you don't mind being recorded. Christina, Louise, Helen.
I don't mind being recorded.
Judy, Robin, Bing, Amy, Bob, Stan, Carmel, Kukulans. Okay, lots of you, so that's great. I'll make sure some of you get into the recording group. Okay, deep breath. Oh, Angela said, I'm missing the.
Sorry, I heard you say something about giving a one-liner, and
yeah, it's okay. A shallow and a deep question when to introduce yourself to the group when you get into the group. Your favorite ice cream flavor, and a significant death and what it taught you. And now I'm going to put you in groups.
Thank you.
And I'm going to.
Should I start over?
That's okay.
Okay. And what I learned from my mother's death is the importance of doing this and thinking ahead, because many things would have been easier if we had known her wishes. So who wants to go next?
Well,
anybody want to jump right in?
I will.
Okay, Carmel.
My favorite ice cream is either
You go.
mocha almond fudge or French silk.
Ooh.
What I learned from my mother's death was I don't know whether she was in denial or it was total fear of dying. But I know that my ministrations to her were not helpful for her, and I feel really bad. And I just now realized that.
We're a small group. Hey, who wants to go next?
I'm Amy.
Amy?
Yeah, I like gelato. Seems to be a little easier on the stomach, so I'll eat any kind of gelato. And I do love peanut butter chocolate. I kind of mix both of those. I love peanut butter chocolate. I can eat a pint. And I feel more like I'm getting ready mentally for deaths in the next 5 years. I blessedly have my parents and Mike's parents and step parents, and they're all alive, and we haven't had a death in the family other than my aunt and uncle died. My uncle last year and my aunt about 10 years ago, and I think in both cases they were able to be at home after long, sort of moderately long cancer illnesses. And I think I mean, I heard that the family and my cousins were there. And so I do look at that as a good thing. I think that was, you know, having family around. So I'm very struck by what's happening now, that people, that's what I'm sort of like holding my hand, crossing my fingers for. My parents are all old, everyone's older. And that being alone at the hospital is the worst thought in my mind. So I'm kind of like, I'm thinking ahead, but I think I think they've all sort of made, you know, directives. And so we have some sense, but it's more about the future that I'm thinking about.
Kukalans or Judy, who wants to go next?
I'll go. My name is Annis, and my favorite ice cream, I go between fruit ice creams and coffee with chocolate and almonds in it. I think for me, I could tell you about the death of Nancy Gelke, who was a member of the church, and how I mean, I've experienced a lot of deaths in my family since as a young child. But with her, I really had a sense of the transcendence working through me as I helped with her. And that's very significant.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
I tip in.
Nick?
I'm Nick Kukalan, and my favorite ice cream is chocolate chip mint. All the deaths in our family have been like, I've been there after the fact. My father, heart attack, my brother, drug overdose, and other, you know, grandparents. And so I have to say kind of the most immediate death experience is with our longtime pet dog of 13, 14 years. And, you know, kind of deciding when time was right to take her to the vet and to take her life. But it was done in such a really beautiful, planned way. The vet, you know, had it set up like a living room and a quilt, and it was just, you know, she got the bite of her last favorite food, and we just got to be with her after she died, and it was just a very sweet and gentle time. So I think for me, like a human experience like that would be also ideal, beautiful.
Thank you.
oh, go ahead,
Judy.
Louise.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, Judy, you go ahead.
All right. My favorite flavor of ice cream is sort of a reverse. It's chocolate mocha almond, but I love, I forget what it's called on top, the powder. Malt, really important to have the malt powder on top. let's see, the death. Oh, some of them had been so sudden and unexpected through heart attacks or suicide. So I'm thinking in those cases that, there's part of it's the planning and part of it's, as Nick was alluding to, or was the transcendence of having that relationship be really all the love that's there beforehand. That some of it's medical and some of it's the relational piece. When my brother died, I couldn't communicate with him. He was aphasic. So, but it was just wanting to be present. And I know sometimes we can't, but I believe that God works through us even when we physically, difficult decisions. I'm not making any sense here, but I got a call at 3 o'clock in the morning, and we can put him on life support for ever and ever, which would be really hard on him because he'd have to be restrained or not. And so, boy, it's some things just come out of the blue, and you have to make those decisions. And the best we can do it is with God's love and knowing that the people are surrounded. So my faith is really important. That's it.
Excellent. Okay, Molly.
Oh, real quick, sure. My name's Molly. My favorite flavor of ice cream is Richardson's Moose Tracks, which you can only get in Middleton, Massachusetts, sadly.
Oh.
Probably one of the most significant deaths was 3 friends of mine from church camp. They were a family, mother, father, daughter, and they had a son too. We were always at camp together for the last 20, 30 years. Beautiful, beautiful people, musicians, creatives, actors, artists. We're leaving camp 5 years ago now, 6 years ago. And we're on the highway, and a guy who was over-medicated coming in their direction, his car jumped the median and killed the mother and daughter instantly. But Don, who was arguably the most injured, like there wasn't an injury he didn't have. He had like 17 broken bones and severe brain injury, lived on life support for 4 weeks afterward. And lots of people came and sat with him every day. I sang to him and prayed to him over the phone because I was a few hours away. And, his son was alive. His son was going home with someone else, his young adult son. And it was just such an excruciating time. Like there was a sense that he was hanging on for his son and yet called by his wife and daughter and injuries to die. And, he never regained consciousness, but I know there was some consciousness there. And so I think about that when I think about, extraordinary measures and what that time is for the living to begin to grieve and say goodbye and have time with you while you're still there. Okay, so I'll let Louise drive since I'm going to be room hopping about how you want to have this conversation.
All right. So I think we're going to, it is not a goal today that you will fill this out and be all done. But I thought we'd go through this, and starting on page 5, my values and beliefs. Because the other pages are things like your name and your agent, unless somebody wants to talk about their agent and what goes into choosing an agent. So maybe I should back up and say, does anybody want to talk about what goes into choosing an agent? No, okay. Then let's go on to page 5, values and beliefs. And think about, if I were having a good day, I would be doing the following. And does anybody have anything they want to share about having a good day? What is a good day? What makes a good day? For me, a good day, it starts with breakfast. I really like breakfast. So food is very important. A good day includes good food. Does anybody else have to have good food for a good day?
Yep.
I'm with you, yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay. And things that matter. What matters most to you?
I think,
You know, is it your family, your friends? Yes. Okay. Okay. So that's what you write then. What about your family?
Sometimes there's a lag and you might want to let there be a little silence and people will jump in.
Yes.
Yeah.
Other ideas?
Okay. One of the things I included was having purpose or purposes. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Is it?
Carmel and Amy
Yes, Carmel.
things they wanted to say.
Okay, Carmel, I didn't hear that. Your sound went away.
I didn't realize each person would do all three.
Okay.
I was thinking we'd all communicate on the first one.
I'm not hearing you.
You're not hearing me?
I can hear you.
I think we can do it. Yeah, for me, your sound is coming and going.
So Louise, since you're having trouble,
So, yeah.
You might either want to designate someone
Maybe I'll mute. I mean, not mute, stop the video.
Okay. And if you continue to have trouble
Okay.
hearing, you might either
Okay.
want to designate someone else to lead the conversation since I'm going to leave in a sec.
Yes.
Or
Okay.
just leave more silence because of the way Zoom works, there's a lag. And don't worry about the awkwardness. This is a good
Okay.
and just trust them to jump in.
Okay.
If you talk less, if you stop just another minute. I'll just wait for 30 seconds.
Molly, while we're waiting.
Yep.
There's one question that came up on our group about assisted suicide or, choosing to end your own life.
That actually came up in Breakout Room 4, and Ben actually has some wisdom about that. Right, Ben? Can you talk about the California law?
Yeah, so I don't want to say that I have wisdom, but I have had some experience with this, and I don't know if Amy's back, but so please jump in. So the End of Life Option Act, as it's known in California, allows for somebody who has a terminal diagnosis, I believe it's 6 months, like a hospice diagnosis, and has been evaluated by 2 separate physicians about 2 weeks apart, to get a prescription for medication is the word that they use. I kind of stumble over that, but a prescription for to take to end your life. And when you die, the cause of death is listed as your primary illness. It's not listed as you did this thing that caused you to die. So there are lots of reasons people decide to take that route. Actually, a lot of people opt to go through the process and have the prescription on hand, but then don't use it at all. And it's just for their own sense of I'm in control. And I can do this if I want to, but I don't have to. There are, in my limited experience as in working with patients and their families who have actually gone this route, there's basically been 2 paths. One is the patient talked about it with their family. Everybody was on board as they could be, and they did it, and people were sad that it happened, but they were honored their choice. The other path is their family member, either they did not communicate or did not communicate well, and the family members were very upset by it. And my experience is that there's all this legal stuff and conversations about the patient, but the impact on their loved ones is almost never discussed. Mm. And the traumatic things that I've seen have been when somebody decides to do this and either they don't communicate it or don't communicate it well, or there are family members who are far away who start offering lots of opinions and basically projecting their anger and sadness and grief on the local family. So I could talk about this for days, but that's kind of my experience as a hospice chaplain, is not so much the technical stuff or why somebody would not do it, but the impact that it has on their family. And it can be good if the family is supportive, and it can go really, really horribly wrong if they're not. I don't know if anybody else has anything to say about that.
Yeah, the only main thing that I would add, no, that's exactly right, Ben. Yeah, and that's why hospice is supposed to be in the loop. And if done well, you should be having those conversations, but doesn't always happen for a variety of reasons. Main thing that I would add is a lot of people come on saying, yeah, can I have that pill? And that's not what it is. It's a very complicated process. It takes weeks, if not longer, to get in place. It's complicated. So it's not a quick fix. It's not something that's fast. It's designed not to be fast, because we really want to take our time with that. And yeah, so I would just say that.
Thank you both. That's super valuable info. As we approach 11:30, any final questions or thoughts before our closing prayer?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I'm so grateful for all the awesome
Thank you, everyone.
thinking and talking partners here. Mandy and Christina and Ben and Amy Smith and Louise and everybody. You're all bringing such wisdom here.
See you next week. Is that it?
See you in 2 weeks. So in 2 weeks, we'll have funeral planning. And that, I do hope that will be fun. You know, Derek's going to play favorite hymns, or like, you know, how did that hymn go again? We'll talk about, you know, colors you want at your funeral, speakers, you know, balloon launches. I don't know. But hopefully it'll be sort of a fun opportunity to think about what really matters to you, how you want to be remembered, the experience you want to give people of yourself as a parting gift. Yeah. And then 2 weeks later, Will's legacy giving, and I'm forgetting a thing with Amy and a special guest from the national setting of UCC, Andy DeBraver, who's awesome. He's a good man.
Planned giving and wills and
giving,
and learning. Yeah, and the church's C circle.
Yeah, different ways to keep having an impact and giving your church or other things you care about life beyond your natural earthly life. Let's pray, beloved. Holy One, we thank you for this time together today to talk about the things that really matter. We know we have such a wide variety of beliefs in you and in life and death and what might come as we cross that threshold into a different reality. But Lord, we lean into this belief stated in your sacred texts that Jesus, who rose from the dead, is Lord of the dead and of the living, and that you are with us always, that nothing can separate us from you, not life, not death, not accidents, not illnesses, not fear or anxiety or anger, not anything. You are with us in all things. And so be with us as we continue this conversation with ourselves, with partners and children and dear friends and those who need to know what our wishes are. We ask you to clarify in our hearts our own values and have the courage to commit them to paper and commit to voicing them, even if our voices shake, to those we love and who love us, so that we might communicate really clearly what matters to us. And may these conversations enrich our living and refine our living and just sharpen and hone our hunger for living. We pray all this in the strong name of Jesus the Christ, who vanquished death forever. Amen.
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 Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Dim you tomorrow.
Yeah.